Beginning in chapter 2 of Mark, Mark tells us 5 stories of confrontation with the scribes and the Pharisees. And each confrontation escalates and gets worse. It starts out with them questioning in their hearts, and by the time they're done, there's a conspiracy to destroy Jesus. So Jesus forgave sins at the beginning of chapter 2. And the scribes and the Pharisees questioned in their hearts who would come out and say that they'd forgive sins. And it seems a legitimate question. Only God can forgive sins. But Jesus reads their minds and their hearts, and then he talks to them. Then he eats with the tax collectors and the sinners, and the scribes and the Pharisees questioned the disciples about Jesus. Then they questioned Jesus about the disciples' eating habits on the Sabbath. And after that, they don't just question. Then they start to accuse. They accuse him of doing something unlawful, breaking the Sabbath by picking off the heads of grain. And now we have a Sabbath healing beginning with chapter 3. And now it's Jesus who asks the questions. And as soon as he heals someone, the Pharisees join in with the Herodians to see how they can destroy him. So, chapter 3 starts out. He entered again into the synagogue, and a man was there whose hand was withered. They were watching him to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath so that they might accuse him. The New King James Version says they were watching him closely. And anytime there's a difference in the translations, always look the word up to see what exactly it means. And they were scrupulously watching him, meticulously watching him. And the reason was not to see if he could heal someone or if he would heal someone. They believed he could and that he would. They watched him to see when he healed someone, to see if he did it on the Sabbath. Now, there is a sick or injured person, and he wants to see if he's healing him. And I can picture them sitting there go, man, that guy don't look like he feels too good. See if he heals that guy. That guy's got a limb missing. See if he can put that back on. That's what they're looking at. They're looking for the sickest person they can find to see if Jesus can heal him. And they had no doubt that he could miraculously heal people, that he could instantaneously heal people, that he could speak a word and heal people, heal diseases and maladies that no one has ever healed before. Wouldn't it make more sense if they were watching him heal people and trying to see how he did it? When you watch a magic show, don't you always kind of wonder, how'd that guy do that? We know it's a trick, but I'd kind of like to see behind the curtain to see how he did it. They didn't care how he did it. They didn't care if he did it. They only cared when he did it. They didn't seem to mind him healing people all week long and not even asking a question, but not on Saturday. And the reason they were paying so much close attention to him is so that they can accuse him. They're trying to find some reason to accuse him. And this word accuse is a legal term. It means to bring him to court. It means to judge him. It means to condemn him. The authorities denied Jesus had the right to do any good on the Sabbath while they themselves were conspiring to kill somebody on the Sabbath. Last week we looked at some of the rules and regulations that they had for agriculture and that they had for harvesting, the rules that weren't in the Bible, rules that they made up. But they also had rules and regulations for actually healing somebody. If you wanted to heal somebody, you had to check with a rabbi first. So first aid was deemed permissible to prevent an injury from getting worse. But if it looked like the guy was turning the corner, like they got a tourniquet around his arm and he quit bleeding, you're all done treating him. Because anything more than that would be considered work on the Sabbath. So here's a quote. In the case of one who is seized with a life-threatening illness, bulmus, causing him unbearable hunger pains and impaired vision, one may feed him even impure foods on Yom Kippur or any other day until his eyes recover, as the return of the sight indicates that he's recovering. So they think this word bulmus means that he has the hunger of an ox. So what's happening with this guy is he's got hypoglycemia or he's a diabetic or something like that, and he's fainting, his vision's going blurry and everything, he's about to fall down. You can feed him something just until his vision clears up. Then he's done till the next day. That indicates that he's recovering and you can't heal him. Furthermore, Rabbi Mattaya ben Harash said, with regard to the one who suffers pain in his throat, one may place medicine inside his mouth on Sabbath, although administering a remedy is prohibited on Sabbath. This is because there is uncertainty whether or not it is a life-threatening situation, for as it has become difficult to ascertain the severity of internal pain, and a case of uncertainty concerning the life-threatening situation overrides the Sabbath. So, you didn't call the doctor. You checked your pain scale with a rabbi. You ever been to the doctor and they want to know where your pain is? I wound up in my daughter-in-law Amanda's emergency room. She was the head nurse of the emergency room. And I wound up in there, and she came in to see what was going on, and the doctor came in and said, how would you rate your pain? I gave it a hearty 2 thumbs up. That's why I'm here. I'm on a gurney. I'm in the emergency room. And Amanda kind of made it clear that she didn't want me showing up in her emergency room anymore. So you got this pain scale, and you have to check with a scribe or a rabbi or a Pharisee to find out exactly what your pain scale is. See if you needed some cough syrup or if you needed a baby aspirin. You could not administer medicine because it might involve grinding herbs or rubbing potions, and that would be considered work. So if you had this stuff, I got some stuff that can cure you here, but you're going to have to wait 24 hours because I can't do any grinding motion, just like you can't do any picking off the grains of wheat that they talked about last week. Similarly, with regard to one upon whom a rock side fell, and there is uncertainty whether or not he is there under the debris or whether he is not there, and there is uncertainty whether he is still alive or whether he was dead, and there is uncertainty whether the person under the debris is a Gentile or a Jew, one clears the pile from the top of him. So you got a lot of questions you got to ask. Just had a rock slide, and we think there's a guy in there. Better go check with the Pharisees, see before we start digging through this rock slide on Saturday, see if anybody, oh, I hear a guy. Sounds like he's speaking Greek. So if he's a Gentile, it'd be a sin to dig him out of there. So now the Sabbath was a special time. The Sabbath was sacred, and it should have been sacred. They were right about that. God created the world in 6 days, and he rested on the seventh day. And when he wrote the 10 Commandments, he incorporated that reasoning into the 10th commandment. You shall rest on Saturday because God rested on Saturday, and that's the longest one of the 10 Commandments. The Sabbath, not only that, was to be kept holy. So there were a lot of Sabbaths in Israel. I think there were 65 regular Saturday Sabbaths. Plus, there was the unleavened bread Sabbath, Pentecost, trumpets, Day of Atonement. Some of those had Sabbath at the beginning and a Sabbath at the end. There was the Feast of the Tabernacles. That had 2 Sabbaths in it, plus the regular Saturday Sabbath sometimes. And every 7th year was a Sabbath year. And they were to let the whole land rest. They weren't to plow. They weren't to plant. They weren't to harvest. And every 50th year, which followed a 7th year, they were supposed to let everything sit there too. 2 years. That actually takes some kind of faith to say we're not going to go to work here for 2 years and we're not going to have anything to eat. We're not going to cut any firewood for 2 years. 2 years in a row, the land was to rest, no farming, no harvesting. And the borders were all to be given back to the original tribes and the original families. So if you'd sold some property and stuff like that, now every 50 years you got to give all that property back. And the indentured servants were all released and the debts were forgiven. That's a tough one. I just took out a loan last week and it's forgiven. That's a pretty good deal. The whole nation has to have some kind of faith to accomplish that one. There's no record of them ever doing it in the Bible. Back in the 1752, 200 years to the year that I was born, they did the Liberty Bell. And they sent it over here and gave it to the colony of William Penn. And there's an inscription on the Liberty Bell that says, "Proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof." And that's taken from Leviticus 25:10, which is talking about the year of Jubilee. Now, the Sabbath year of Jubilee probably would have never worked in Pennsylvania. Because, first of all, they couldn't grow any crops or harvest any crops, couldn't cut any firewood, can't work in a steel mill, can't pump oil. It probably wouldn't have worked in 1700s Pennsylvania. It certainly wouldn't work today, because the Sabbath laws were never given to the whole world. They were given to the covenant people of God under the law of Moses who lived in a specific area. It was only for those people. So those Sabbath laws, they didn't work anywhere. And there's lots of talk about the Sabbath in the Old Testament, and there's Sabbath breaking in the Old Testament. But the problem with the Pharisees and the scribes that they had with Jesus was not with biblical Sabbaths. It was with the things that they made up. And none of that was written down at the time of Jesus. It was oral law. It was spoken, and the people that knew it were the scribes and the Pharisees. So they had complete control over the Sabbath laws, the healing laws. They had complete control over it because it wasn't written down. Nobody could go look it up. You had to listen to them. So when the rules they made in order to protect themselves from breaking the Sabbath law, they placed on everybody else. And the laws were made up during the time between the Testaments. So at the end of the Old Testament, the people came back and they were ruled by the Persians, and then they were ruled by the Greeks, and there were times when they were treated terribly, and they were so afraid they were going to lose these, they started having these oral laws to protect them. So these laws were not even written down in Jesus' day. You had to learn them from the scribes and the Pharisees. And you didn't learn them from the Sadducees because they didn't believe in them. They didn't believe in them. They only believed in the literal first 5 books of Moses. So they didn't believe in those laws. And the Pharisees and the scribes reminded of them constantly. They just filled the land with all of that kind of stuff. Most of these started getting written down after the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, but it was almost all took place after 135 when Hadrian completely destroyed Israel. And the Jews became illegal people. And so that's when they knew, we're going to lose these if we don't write them down. So we need to look at why the Second Temple Pharisees and the scribes have all these laws on Sabbath keeping that didn't exist under Moses. Now Jeremiah, he lived to see him get drug off into Babylonian captivity. And he said, the whole land will be a desolation and a horror, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon 70 years. So that's where our 70 years came from. And the Chronicles tells us why this happened at the end of Chronicles. Then they burned the house of God and broke down the wall of Jerusalem and burned all the fortified cities with fire and destroyed all the valuable articles. Those who had escaped from the sword, he carried away to Babylon. And they were servants to him and to his sons until the rule of the kingdom of Persia. And here's why. To fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah until the land had enjoyed its Sabbaths. All the days of its desolation, it kept Sabbath until the 70 years were complete. So it's the land. The land had Sabbath. And they had skipped all of these Sabbath years, and they had not let the land rest. So we're going to get them all at once. And so that's why there's 70 years here. There's 70 years in that captivity so that the land could rest like God told them to and God wanted them to. They were completely removed from the land. Now nobody's over there plowing or harvesting or anything like that. And even then, when they returned, they didn't learn anything. After they came home from the 70 years, Nehemiah says, in those days I saw Judah and some who were treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in sacks of grain and loading them on donkeys, and as well as wine and grapes and figs and all kinds of loads. And they brought them into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. So I admonished them on the day they sold food. And also men of Tyre who were living there, who imported fish and all kinds of merchandise and sold them to the sons of Judah on the Sabbath, even in Jerusalem. Then I reprimanded the nobles of Judah and said, what is this evil thing that you're doing by profaning the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers do the same, so that our God brought on us and on this city all this trouble? Yet you are adding to the wrath of Israel by profaning the Sabbath. Israel never again ruled themselves. There was never a king, there was never a son of David that sat on the throne again. So during the Greek period, the Greeks tried to Hellenize them. So when we say Hellenize, we made Greek them. Make them into a Greek culture, Greek languages, Greek art, Greek architecture, Greek morals, Greek religion. So when you hear in there the Hellenized people, they're the ones that have the Greek culture. And that's all that word means. So during this Greek period, they began to Hellenize them, to make them into Greeks. And Antiochus, who was a Greek leader, the Greek king at that time over them, he tried to force everyone to become Greek in their thinking, in their language, in their practices, and their religion. So he went in and profaned the temple, slaughtered a hog on the altar, did everything he could to make them completely not be able to be Jewish. And this is when the Pharisees developed and took the laws of God, especially the Sabbath, seriously. And they began to build a fence around them. So this is what they said. Moses received the Torah at Sinai and transmitted it to Joshua, Joshua to the elders to the prophets to the men of the great assembly, and said three things: be patient in the administration of justice, raise many disciples, and make a fence around the Torah. Did Moses say that? Why did they say that? Because they said there were two laws. There was the written down law that Moses wrote down. And there was the oral law that he passed to Joshua and to the kings and down to me. So they said there literally was a law of Moses that was written down. And the reason they said that was because if you just read the law of Moses, you don't have all these details that we give you. So they said that that law existed forever. And there are a lot of Orthodox Jews who say that to this day. They read the Mishnah, they read the Talmud, they read all of the Germa, they read all of these books daily to learn all of these things that we've been looking at, because they say they came from Moses and they were passed down and they weren't written down until 300 or 400 years after Jesus, and they were codified in about 1100 AD. By a guy named Rambam. Literally, that was his name. And so he's like almost a worshiped person. That's where these laws came from. They weren't written down in Jesus' day, but they believed that they were real. What did Moses actually say? You shall not add to the word which I am commanding you, nor take away from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God which I command you. The reason not to add to the commandments is so that you may keep the commandments. You can't keep the commandments if you're adding to the commandments. And the reason not to do it, we actually had quite a long class on that. We called it staying on the line. Let's stay on the line. How do we stay on the line? How do we not go above and not go below? And we looked at some examples from the Bible. So they said Moses had two laws. He had a law that was written down, and one was passed by word of mouth, and you have to get that from us because it's not written down. So during New Testament times, these still had not been written down. That's why it's so hard to read this sometimes. You're going, what? Why is he arguing with him on this point? Why are they saying this? They're saying that because they've been passing this down for several hundred years. And they were the only ones who knew the rules, and they expected everyone to listen to them and to obey them, because they then are the ones that had the law. And they were constantly reminding, constantly correcting, judging, condemning. But Jesus condemns this. He said, They tie up heavy burdens and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are unwilling to move them with so much as a finger. But they do all their deeds to be noticed by men, and they broaden their phylacteries and lengthen the tassels on their garments. They love the place of honor at banquets and the chief seats of the synagogues, and respectful greetings in the marketplace, and being called rabbi by men. So their righteousness is actually a self-righteousness, and their salvation is by earning. Their salvation is by all of the works that they keep. If you can do enough good stuff on the Sabbath and not break the laws that they wrote down, you're righteous. So they had these three sayings that the men of the great assembly gave. Be deliberate in judgment, be cautious, patient, and just in legal decisions. Make a fence around the Torah. Create protective measures and boundaries to safeguard the observance of the law. So it's not just observing the law, but they had all these other laws they added onto it so you couldn't get close to the law. And then it said, raise many disciples. Invest in this teaching and expand all these community things. And that's what Jesus said they were doing. Woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, and hypocrites, because you travel around land and sea to make one proselyte. And when he becomes one, you make him twice the fold of hell as you yourselves. They were intentionally doing it. Jesus said, don't. They were trying to raise disciples, and Jesus and his disciples were not cooperating. So they put this fence up. The Sabbath is over there. The Sabbath is over there. And the fence is here. They can't even see the Sabbath from there. But then they build a fence around the fence. Now you have no idea what the Sabbath is about, because they build a fence around the fence. And that's what all of these writings in the Mishnah are. That's what all the oral law was that the Pharisees had. And in that guard shack are the Pharisees and the scribes. They're the ones that's watching to make sure you don't go into no man's land. And they're criticizing, and they're judging, and they're condemning. So we looked at some of the agricultural laws last week that they had, but there were also laws on healing. There's a whole section of laws on healing. It is forbidden to set a dislocated foot or hand on the Sabbath. One may not straighten an infant's limbs. So if your baby breaks his leg on Friday night late, sorry. You're going to have to lay there and scream and holler all weekend until we can get back to you when it's legal. If an infant's limbs were crooked, they would manipulate them in order to straighten them out. And this would not be done on the Sabbath because it's similar to prohibited labor of building. You can't go nail two 2x4s together. Why would you be able to straighten a baby's leg? You see how their rules were? It's against the Sabbath law to repair a roof that fell down, the same as it is to fix a baby's leg. Jesus said man was not made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was made for man. Keeping the Sabbath was to be beneficial. It was not meant to be a means of attaining righteousness. You didn't keep lots of Sabbath stuff and abstain from lots of Sabbath stuff in order to be righteous. It wasn't made to further burden the people of God. The more Sabbath you kept, the more righteous you were. The more difficult the Sabbath laws, the more holy you were. And so it had become a way of earning salvation, and that's what's going on here. Now, I want to come back to Mark's story. If you take an excursus, the commentaries, they call this an excursus. If you take an excursus long enough, you forget what you're talking about. So we're back in Mark. And he said to the man with the withered hand, get up and come forward. And he said to them, is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save a life or to kill? And they kept silent. This is a rhetorical question. The answer to this question is obvious. The most stringent of the scribes and the Pharisees permitted saving a life. And all the law of Moses condemned murder. So there's two questions here. Is it okay to do good on the Sabbath? Or is it okay to do evil on the Sabbath? Is it okay to heal somebody? Or is it okay to kill somebody? And remember, they're plotting to kill him on the Sabbath. So they were judging Jesus for doing good while they were plotting murder. After looking around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. So Jesus brings this guy center stage. He's not hiding anything from them. This is not just a healing. This is a demonstration. When Jesus healed the paralyzed man, he questioned their hearts. When he ate dinner with Matthew's friends, they questioned the disciples. When the disciples didn't follow their fasting regulations, they questioned Jesus. And when they ate field around the grain field, they accused him. Now Jesus questions them. And this angered Jesus. They've been asking questions, and they've been making and demanding answers, and now they're making accusations. And Jesus has been answering them. He's been giving them answers, and he's been elevating the conversation. Now Jesus himself asks a simple question, an obvious question to answer, but they remain silent. They like asking questions, and they like being asked questions so they can give these answers. Sometimes I watch a press conference or a court case or a TV show, and some people, they ask loaded questions, and you know they're asking you a gotcha question, and there's no way to answer to get out of it. Some questions require an explanation or a qualification or a definition or a context. Sometimes when they ask you a question, the straightforward answer isn't there. Have you stopped beating your wife? You can't answer that. Yeah, I've stopped. No, I haven't stopped. There's no yes. It's not a yes or no question. But Jesus is answering a straightforward question. And nobody likes being interrogated. I don't like being interrogated. I don't like it when I get pulled over by the police. They should come up and say, "I got you speeding. You got a tail light out." They come up, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Well, even if I have a pretty good idea why they pulled me over, I'm not going to tell them, because that might not be it. It might be the body in the trunk. I don't know exactly why they pulled me over. Don't use that one anyway. It really makes the policeman mad. I've heard. So the first part of the question seems reasonable. Is it lawful to do good or to harm on the Sabbath? And the second one's, it's really shocking. Is it okay to save a life or to kill somebody on the Sabbath? Well, they had their own rules about saving a life, and nobody thought it was okay to kill anybody on the Sabbath. To do good or bad refers to the man. To refer to living or killing refers to their hearts, because they were planning on killing him. And that's why Jesus is so angry. And their silence angered him. Actually, there are three words that Mark uses here, and he doesn't use them anywhere else in his book: anger, grieved, and hardness of heart. He uses those three words. And that hardness of heart, some translations say stubborn. It means unwillingness, not stuck. Sometimes I'm reading the Bible and I really don't know what it says, or I'm going to really have to make some alterations in my life to go along with what it says. But Jesus is going to use this same word when he's talking to his disciples when we get to chapter 6 and to chapter 8, over two similar incidences. So he said he got into the boat, and the wind stopped, and they were utterly astonished, for they had not gained any insight from the incident of the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. So they had this miraculous feeding of the thousands of people. They got in a boat and there was a storm and they're afraid. They were supposed to make a correlation between God can make food out of nothing and God's the one that created the storm. And they didn't make it. And Mark calls that a hardness of heart. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why do you discuss the fact that we have no bread? Do you not understand? Do you have a hardened heart?" So it's not just these guys that we see as evil. It's the disciples that have a hardened heart. And now, as we go through Mark, it gets a little bit more about us. Servant passages and things like that. Decisions that have to be made. But mostly right now, we're looking at these guys and what they saw and what decisions they made. And you kind of put yourself in the story and say, what would I have done in that situation? And that's hard to do because we know a lot more and different things than they did. But that's what we're supposed to see. How did they make those decisions? What is it that's causing our hardened hearts? What's causing our stubbornness with the Word of God? The hardness of a heart is a big deal in the Bible. And these cases seem more like they're off track or we get off track. So, the Pharisees went out and immediately began conspiring with the Herodians against him on how they might destroy him. Neither Jesus nor the man did any work. There was no manipulation. He didn't straighten his hand out. He didn't grind up any herbs and run them on him. He didn't pour anything down his throat. Jesus spoke, and speaking was permitted on the Sabbath. It was encouraged. And the man stretched out his hand. It was not against the law of Moses to raise your hand on the Sabbath. So speaking and raising your hand was permitted on the Sabbath. So what's going on here? What did they find wrong with Sabbath breaking when they didn't do any work? But Mark introduces these two new characters here to help us explain what's going on. They're called the Herodians. And the Herodians are going to come up again later when he gets down to Jerusalem and in the temple. And the Herodians are going to come up and they're going to side with the Pharisees. And they're going to plot to destroy Jesus. So I want to tell a little bit about them right now, and we'll be familiar with them, because they're kind of strange that you're reading Mark along and they introduce a new character. When you're writing your novel, don't just throw a character in there and then have him disappear. There has to be an explanation as to why that character is there. So knowing a little bit about them adds to this passage and to the other passages. There's 6 Herods in the New Testament. There are 5 different rulers named Herod referred to in the Scripture. Herod the Great, he had some sons, Archelaus and Antipas, and Antipas is the guy that's the Herod right now. And he had his grandsons, Herod Agrippa I and Herod Agrippa II. They all named everybody. It's like, was it Joe Frazier that named all his kids Joe? Named all his kids the same. Or no, it was George Foreman. Named all his kids George. He had a whole sack of kids named George there. And so we've got these guys that have the same name. And Herod is a family name, but it's also a title. It's a title for king or tetrarch or whatever they were in control of at that time. So if we look at the Herod family and Herod himself, the original Herods, then we begin to see a mentality that is the poison that's the Herodians. So Herod the Great is the one who tried to kill baby Jesus. It's this guy's dad. When you trace the family tree back, you find out that the great-grandfather, Herod, his father was an Edomite. His mother was an Arab. And then they were forced to convert to Judaism during the Maccabean period between the Old Testament and the New Testament. So how can you be a king of the Jews when you're not really a Jew? They want to be king of the Jews, but they're not a Jew. They've been forced into the Jewish religion, but they're not Jewish. But the most important aspect of their identity is that they're Greek to the core. Buildings, architecture, art, literature, bathhouses, theaters, stadiums, everything that they built was Greek. They liked Greek. When the Greeks came in, they wanted to leave their culture. They wanted to leave their language. They wanted to leave their art. They wanted to improve the world. Rome didn't care. They just wanted your money and they wanted your land. So Herod actually promoted the Olympic Games, and he was voted president of the Olympic Games for life. But when it came to politics, Herod was Roman. He served Rome because Rome is the one that gave him his power and his money. So you have these guys that they're an Arab, an Idumean, a Jewish, they're Greek, and they're Roman. They knew all the angles. They knew how to play everybody, whatever it was that served them best. So when Herod the Great died, the area of his rule in Palestine area got divided between his sons, and Herod Antipas, which is the Herod we're talking about here in Mark, got the region of Galilee. So here's where Jesus is from, and here's where Jesus moved. But this is the original capital of Herod. This is where he was. Jesus was only a couple miles away, and while they were building that city, pretty obvious that Jesus and his dad walked over there. It's only about a 40-minute walk. They walked over there and worked. Jesus wasn't raised in a bubble. But Herod decided that he was going to build a whole new city. And he built Tiberias in honor of the new Roman emperor. But when he built this new city, he built it on top of a Jewish graveyard. So it was unclean. So now the Jews, they won't move there. And everything in that city was Greek. Greek architectures, bathhouses, stadiums. He built this for 20 years. He completed this city about the time Jesus was 20, 25 years old. So this city's kind of new, and he couldn't get any Jews to move there, and if you want to have a successful city, you have to have Jews move there, so he started making incentives. Tax breaks, free housing, free citizenship. He just was handing everything out to get people to move there. He cut their taxes. He freed indentured servants. He gave away property and homes. So it's a Greek city, but it's a Roman city. Wherever the Romans are, that's where the money was. Magdala, where they think Mary Magdalene came from, that's where the salting plants were. You can see them all outlined today. They brought the fish in, and that's where they were preserved, but they shipped out of Tiberias. Everybody had to go through Tiberias in order to go out. Jesus was never raised in a bubble. He was around this stuff all his life. So there was these Roman and Hellenistic values and morals and culture everywhere. And Tiberias, the town, is representative of this group of people known as the Herodians. The Herodians are a people who are pro-Rome, pro-Herod. They are more a political party than they are a religious sect. So they got along with the Sadducees more than they did the Pharisees, because the Sadducees loved Herod because Herod built them this beautiful temple and he supports them. In fact, he had a palace right there. He had a place where he was actually higher in his palace where he could look down into the temple and he could see him and watch him and keep track of him. So the Sadducees, they wanted him. The Herodians wanted him. The Pharisees didn't. But here we have the Herodians and the Pharisees that are all working together. So the Sadducees are the aristocrats, and most of them are priests. And the priests like Herod because he built him this magnificent temple. And so there was a connection between Herod and the Sadducees based on expediency, as both were anti-Pharisee aristocrats with interest in preserving the economic and political status quo. They were political. They were a political party more than they were religious. The Herodians lived a kind of go-between existence, yet were always careful to tie their fate to those in power. That describes the Herodian party. They were wealthy, they were powerful, and their goal is, how do we preserve our power and advance our agenda? That's why they want Jesus out of the way. They water down their faith, they compromise, they flex, they change. They roll with the punches. In every situation they were asking, who do I need to befriend here? Who do I need to betray here? Who do I need to bribe here? Who do I need to marry? Who do I need to murder? So this is what the Herodians were. And one of the most horrible things for God's people is when the religious leaders join forces with the politicians. That's when the destruction of Christianity and the persecution of God's people takes place. Now we need to remember and review some of these things when we get to the idea of who do we pay tribute to? Do we pay tribute to Caesar or do we pay tribute to God? And the two people asking that questions are the Pharisees, who say pay it to God, and the Herodians, who say pay it to Caesar. So they team up with the Pharisees, in whom they have nothing in common, and they do not like them, and they will get even slimier later in the last week of Jesus' life. So last week we saw the first hint that Jesus was going to be killed. But the days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day. So we've got a prediction now already that Jesus was going to die. And now we have a hint of who and why he will be killed. And he's still in Galilee. So the same authority and the conflicts resulting from it are going to be replayed in Jerusalem with the same religious people when they get into the temple. The reference to the bridegroom as being taken from them is a plot against Jesus' life, and it's already the cornerstone of the book of Mark and the passion and the death of the Son of God. So we have the two main enemies and persecutors of the church here: the religion and the government. And here are the Pharisees and the Herodians. The religion and the government conspire together. The Pharisees made themselves Lord of the Sabbath. They told you what the Sabbath was. They told you what to do on the Sabbath. And the Herodians didn't care anything about the Sabbath. They made themselves king of Israel. But Jesus says, I'm the Messiah, and I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. And for this, they're going to kill him. Thanks for paying attention.